Welcome back to Night Shift Cozy. You're safe here. Let's slow down together. The lighthouse keeps its shape against the evening, a patient column of stone rising from the cliff. Sea and sky share the same subdued blue, the kind that carries light like a memory rather than a blaze. Far offshore, the storm waits with the manners of a guest who will not enter until invited. Its first signals travel ahead of it, a low murmur on the horizon, the sea drawing a slightly longer breath, the air turning cooler as if the day has set down its cup and stepped away. Elias arrives with a key that has known generations of pockets. The iron door yields with a familiar reluctance, its hinges murmuring the same old sentence it has spoken for years. Inside, the air keeps the day's chill in its stones. It is a clean cold, edged by salt and the faintest thread of kerosene from a lantern kept for emergencies. He closes the door behind him, and the sounds outside soften, as if pressed by felt. The spiral of stairs climbs ahead, careful and narrow. Elias places a hand on the inner wall, palm finding the smoothness rubbed there by keepers long gone. His boots test each step in turn. The wood voices itself in small creaks that lean toward comfort rather than complaint. The wind, curious, brushes across the narrow windows, set into the tower like the slits in a conch shell. From far below comes the steady fold and spread of the surf, the cliff translating its rumble into a low, even hum that sits in the bones. He carries the lamp's small kit in a canvas satchel. Wick trimmer, soft cloth, flask of oil, a brass key, a pencil, the thin weather book with its mottled cover. The bag knocks lightly against his hip as he climbs. With each turn of the stair, the light outside settles darker, the colour of the sea deepening from slate to ink. He can smell the evening on the air that slips in past the window frames. Salt, a clean wetness, and the mild damp of linen in an unheated room. At the watchroom landing, he pauses, letting his breath find the slower cadence the night will keep. The door there is lighter than the one below. It yields to his shoulder and welcomes him into the circular room beneath the lantern. The space is simple and companionable. A small iron stove that needs no duty tonight. A chair polished by use. A table with the logbook resting squarely. And the barometer on the wall, steady as a heartbeat. Elias sets down the satchel and crosses to the barometer. He taps the glass lightly and reads the needle. The numbers carry the weight of habit. His mouth moves around them in silence, the way a person might greet an old friend with a nod. Pressure easing. Wind east by southeast. He notes it in the weather book with a pencil that has worn down to the length of his palm. The graphite draws a grey line, soft as dusk. The lantern chamber waits above, its glass dark, its lenses holding the last of the day like a handful of old gold. Before the night, there is the ritual. He unrolls the soft cloth and works slowly around the brass. A gentle polish, a patient circle, a breath to clear the last mist of his touch. The metal warms under his hand. The scent of clean brass mingles with the oil and the salt. He checks the wick, trimming the edge with the small snip that feels like cutting a ribbon. He tests the mechanism, the turn of its smooth gears, the poised balance of the mantle. Each motion is small and exact, and in their quiet sequence they knit the evening together. On the far side of the glass, the sky deepens. The water takes on a dense, velvety quiet. He can no longer see the line where distance begins, but he can feel it in the way sound carries. A single gull gives the day a last word. The storm speaks again from the horizon. A long thought rolling through cloud and falling away. Elias dips the wick to the oil and waits. The fuel releases its faint, clean breath. Kerosene, like the idea of the lemon peel. The wick drinks. The flame catches with the softest confidence and, in catching, considers itself a small shape of light, a golden halo that lifts from its seed and gestures outward. For a few moments he lets the flame grow in solitude. Lenses take the glow and coax it into clarity. Brass accepts the light and returns it as a modest brightness, like kindness remembered. He watches until the wick holds steady, until the light has found the temper it will keep through the night. When he sets the mechanism to its turning, the beam gathers itself, then sweeps, and the room, and then the sea, receives a slow, thoughtful pulse. Dark, light, dark, light. A breath, evenly measured. Below the lantern room, the watch room accepts this rhythm into its objects. The logbook's paper looks slightly warmer. The rim of the cup on the shelf glints once per turn. Even the stove, cool and quiet, takes a soft edge of gold when the beam passes. Elias returns to the barometer, the anemometer reading. The temperature hung discreetly half in shadow by the door. He records each with the tidy handwriting he was taught as a younger man. Letters that seem content not to excel, but to be legible and calm. The tower adjusts to the night, like a person settling a blanket around their shoulders. Drafts find their paths and become murmurs. The windows collect a fine sweat of mist that beads and slides. When he opens the small pane to taste the wind, a clean thread of cold passes his cheek and collarbone, reminding him of the stone's stored chill. He notes the direction with a finger held to the air, then closes the window gently and hears the tower resume its whispering equilibrium. He checks the oil again. He checks the glass again. He runs a finger over the edge where metal meets glass and feels the precise join, the narrow seam engineered long ago, still faithful. There is a pleasure in such dependability. He lifts the wick a breath and then lowers it, standing with the exactness that the lamp likes best. It is not fussiness, it is courtesy. The lamp answers with an even burn, its halo a soft planet within the glass. The first touch of rain arrives as a suggestion rather than an announcement. He hears it before he sees it, a slight thickening in the sea's voice, the air taking on a texture like silk brushed the wrong way. The window darkens by a degree as the mist begins. Then the light reveals itself upon the droplets, each tiny bead turning for a moment into a spark. The storm is not in a hurry. It has come to keep company. Elias returns to the table and sits. The chair meets him with the quiet permission of something shaped by use. He opens the drawer and takes out the small compass whose face has grown faint, a habit he keeps for no necessary reason beyond fondness. He watches the needle think and settle. On the wall, the clock keeps a soft, restrained conversation with itself. Everything here speaks in low voices, and the sum of those voices becomes a calm that reaches the skin and then goes deeper. He writes the first narrative line of the night in the logbook. Light exhibited at 1843. Weather: storm gathering offshore. Wind east-southeast steady. Slight swell. Visibility: fair, softening. He sets the pencil down and listens to the rain become true rain. Each drop is a small, cool touch on the glass above. A brief star that lives and goes at once. The scent of damp intensifies, not sharp, but round and earthy, like folded linen brought in from a line before it is entirely dry. Between checks, he walks the circumference of the room, and then the narrow metal walkway that rings the lantern, careful hands on cold rail. The beam sweeps over the water with a patient reach, making a path that moves even as it points. Somewhere out there, though no ship will need it tonight, the light completes the old agreement between land and sea. I see you. I am here. His breath fogs lightly when he steps back inside. He adds a touch more oil. He wipes a trace of salt from the inner glass with the cloth, not pressing, but letting the weave collect the fine crystal. The cloth smells faintly of lemon oil from the last polish. He folds it neatly along its previous crease and returns it to the satchel. The small ritual of order as necessary as any mechanical duty. Wind explores the tower with a slightly bolder hand as the storm draws nearer. There is no complaint in it, just curiosity. The narrow slits of the windows answer with a brushed tone, a long vowel drawn through a flute. The stairs below knock once as the temperature changes and the wood shifts contentedly into its night posture. Everything knows what to do. Elias feels the knowledge in his shoulders, in the way his hands move without haste, in the way his thoughts spread out like water finding the shape of a basin. He pours a little warm water from a flask he brought. Not hot, just warmer than the room, and rinses his hands. The sensation is small and pleasant. His fingers remember the day's tasks and let them go. He dries them on a towel that smells faintly of soap and sea air, then folds the towel and puts it away. When he lifts his eyes, the light makes its steady pass across the walls, and he feels again the modest grandeur of the work. A careful light set to keep its watch. A human hand opening the night with simple, exact motions. He looks once more through the glass. The horizon has dissolved into a deep and gentle blur. The rain is regular now, more a texture than a sound. The way knitted wool has a feel that warms before it covers. The beam moves, the sea nods, the cliff listens. He closes the lantern door with a soft finality, and the mechanism ticks in a measured cadence. The night's metronome. Back at the table, he draws a line in the logbook under the opening notes of the shift. It pleases him, that line, not for what it separates, but for how it aligns the hours to come. He sits and lets the weight of the tower rest through his spine into the seat, feeling the integrity of stone, the faithful rhythm of the lamp above, the small grip of pencil against paper fibres still present in his hand. Outside, the storm gathers by degrees, considerate, unhurried, wearing its grey like a well-made coat. Inside, the lighthouse keeps its warm geometry, circle within circle, glass around flame, stone around air, light around darkness, and back again. Elias listens to the hush before the rain becomes all the night's ink. He has begun his watch. The sea, the wind, the clock, the lantern. Each knows its part. The evening steadies, and the night accepts him, and then the rain finds its rhythm and keeps it. It arrives as a fine, even veil, hardly more than a silver brushing over the glass, and then steadies into something confident and regular. Every drop has a place, every drop is counted. The sea below answers with its own quiet arithmetic, waves lifting and laying themselves upon the rocks with patient force. Inside, the lighthouse breathes. The lamp gives a soft seethe of warmth. Its metal skin holds heat, carrying it through the little room like a low hearth. The lens turns with a faithful murmur, and the great beam unfurls into the mist, a pale ribbon laid across the night. The stone, cool by nature, keeps a slow memory of the day's chill along the floor and the stairwell, a reminder that not every surface is warmed by effort or light. Elias moves as if he knows the music by heart. He checks the wick, trims the faint charcoal edge with a careful hand, and watches the flame respond, smaller for a breath, then fuller, cleaner, settled. He regards the brass collar and the fittings with a quiet pride, the way a gardener might look at a well-tended bed. Clouds gather and loosen beyond the panes. The storm is present, but not personal. It carries on, and so does he. On the table, the weather log lies open. He writes the hour, the reading, the feel of the air in a few spare words. Barometer, falling, then steadying. Wind, east by south, moderate. Visibility, misted. The nib scratches gently across the paper. The ink feeds and settles. The script keeps its shape, even as the night breathes around it. He hears the distant call of the foghorn and lifts his head. It comes through the rain as a low vowel stretched to the horizon, more felt than heard. It belongs to another keeper, somewhere along the coast. Another pool of light, cutting a slow circle in the weather. Elias takes comfort in that. The world extends, the duties match. One night's labour leans against another's, beam to beam. The tea is ready. He pours it into the chipped enamel mug. The steam is fragrant, earthy, with a slight sweetness that seems to rise from the leaves themselves. He wraps his palms around the warmth and stands near the lamp, letting the comfort through his fingers. Outside, the rain thickens, softening the edges of the sea so that it seems nearer and older at once. He sips and watches the beam. The light turns and turns, steady as a metronome, crossing rain and mist, catching for a moment in droplets that flare and vanish. Every revolution feels like a note in the long song of this place. He has played the same note through winters and summers, gale nights and mild ones. The repetition does not dull it. It makes it true. He sets the mug down and wipes a breath fog from the glass with the cloth hung by the frame. The pain is cool against his knuckles. A delicate draught threads itself under the door and along the floorboards, smelling of wet salt and kelp. Somewhere in the timbers there is the occasional friendly creak, the kind that says the structure knows how to bend and has done so many times before. He takes up the small pot of polish and the square of soft cloth. The brass responds under his touch. First the smudges lift, then the clouding clears, and at last the metal deepens into its own contained light. He works in circles, unhurried. The cloth grows warm in his hand. The polish has that faint tang that reminds him of workshops and sheds. He pauses to feel the smoothness he's made and smiles to himself. A private satisfaction that needs no witness. Again the log, he marks a new hour. The barometer's needle sits a hairline higher, as if the storm is taking a breath before deciding what it wants to be. He notes the observation and adds a quiet remark about swell height, a phrase he's written 100 times. The nib skates, and the page drinks it down and lies calm. The kettle cools. He tops up his cup. The tea tastes darker now, having rested longer. He leans his hip against the table, watches a single bead of water travel the length of the pane, gathering smaller beads as it goes. It reaches the sill and disappears with a shy sound into the frame. The foghorn speaks again, farther this time. Or perhaps the wind has turned the voice aside. Either way, the message is the same. I am here. Warmth pools near the lamp. Step away, and the air begins to nibble at the sleeves and collar. He moves to the door for a moment, pushes it open to look down the spiral. The stairwell breathes a cooler smell. Old wood, stone damp, a trace of the day's salt carried upward. He closes the door, and the light inside becomes rounder, closer. The room returns to itself. He cleans the lamp glass as the lens glides. It is an intimate choreography. He bends in the short moments between revolutions, cloth following arc, hand tracing the permanent path the machine will always travel. He is never in a rush. He is simply timed to something larger than his own body, and that feels restful in its own way. Rain thickens, then thins, as if the sky is testing its own balance. Beyond the glass, the sea surface is pewter where the beam sweeps, and ink where it does not. The comb of white at the cliff base brightens briefly, then fades. He thinks about the boats out there, none visible tonight, but he makes space for their imagined hulls and damp ropes and sleeping crews. He thinks of how light makes a promise without words. He keeps it. He moves the candle closer to the logbook, and its light flickers over the edges of the weather pages. The flame has no hurry either. It simply stands in its small, bright clothing, panting lightly when the draft comes. It reveals a thumbprint in the old varnish, a tiny nick in the table's edge, a loop of thread lifting from the cloth binding at the log's spine. These details feel like company. He adjusts the lamp's airflow. The flame refines itself to a clean, steady heart, and the hum deepens almost imperceptibly. The glass grows, very slightly, warmer. He rests his fingers against it for a brief second, measuring heat the way he has always measured it, by touch and trust. Some gauges are written into the hand. Another entry. He notes the steady rainfall, the softened wind, the way the swell smooths once the tide turns. He writes, "All well," a phrase that has lived in the log longer than he has. It remains entirely true. He takes a moment to stand with his eyes closed. There is a kindness in not looking, sound takes its place as guiding sense. The rain arranges itself into many small patterns. The thin patter at the metal frame, the softer brushing at the glass, a more emphatic ticking from some unseen gutter lip. The sea breathes in depth. The building whispers to its own joints. In this closed-eyed map, he knows exactly where he is. He opens his eyes and wipes a smear he missed. The cloth is damp at the edge now. He turns it in his hand, hunting for a dry corner. He has done this so often that his fingers find it without his eyes. A simple competence, the kind that never boasts, the kind that lives quietly in the bones. He steps to the cupboard and checks the oil. The smell rises. Kerosene, salt, clean metal, not harsh, familiar. He checks levels, notes them, replaces the cap. His hand leaves a print on the tin, a pale oval that fades as the surface cools again. He runs a palm over the shelf and feels the fine grit of salt the wind has smuggled in. He'll wipe it later. There's an order to the night. He drifts back to the window. The world beyond has lost its edges. Mist blurs the distance. The beam gives shape to the near air and sets it to glowing. Now and then, a heavier burst of rain presses its palm against the glass and slides away. And the room takes a breath, as if in sympathy. He drinks the last of the tea and sets the mug aside. A second brew would be welcome, but there is time, and nothing is urgent here. He chooses instead to listen to the simple chorus. The lamp, the rain, the far companion sound over the water. His breathing finds the middle of it and settles. In the stairwell below, a draught curls up and slips under the door. It lifts a corner of paper and makes it flutter. He lays a finger on it, and the flutter stops. Silence, then the gentle equilibrium again. The lighthouse is a small world and a whole one. He looks across the room. The candle has burned down by a measured thumb's width. The lamp keeps its unwavering work. The notes in the book line up like staves. His jacket on the peg darkens with a fine spray that must have found him when he opened the door earlier. Everything is engaged in the same quiet task: to be here and to keep. He draws the cloth once more along the brass rim. It gleams as if speaking. He sees his face for an instant in the curve, softened by misted light, gentled by the warmth, untroubled. He thinks of the many keepers before him, the hands that have held this same cloth, the eyes that have watched this same night beam comb the sea. He feels himself joined. And then he writes another line. Rain steady, wind easing, visibility poor but restful to the mind. All well. The words sit and do not move. He caps the ink and listens to the small click that seems to close a thought. Somewhere far along the coast, the foghorn speaks again and fades. The room absorbs the sound like a house that has welcomed guests for generations. He takes the mug, turns it upside down to drain the last shining drops, then sets it on the sill to dry. The glass is cool beneath his palm. The stone is cooler still. The beam completes its long, patient sweep. It touches the edge of the window, gilds the rim of the mug, crosses his sleeve in a pale bar, and moves on. He watches it go and come again. Outside, the rain goes on saying what it has always said. Inside, he answers in the language of his work. Elias breathes, and the lighthouse breathes with him. Warmth at his chest, cool at his ankles, ink on his fingers, salt in his hair. The night opens like a book that knows when to turn its own pages. He turns nothing, and everything turns around him. The hours taste of tea and metal, and the faint sweetness of old wood warmed by lamplight. He keeps the beam true and lets the world blur to a soft, consoling rhythm. The storm settles into its own steadiness. The keeper settles into his. And yet, in its own quiet time, the storm loosens its hold. The rain slips away in the small hours, leaving the world rinsed and quiet. Clouds part like careful curtains, and the horizon shows a thin seam of rose, so pale it seems to breathe. The sea, which muttered and shifted all night, lies smooth again, a sheet of softened silver that gathers the early light and returns it without hurry. Elias stands beside the lamp and feels the hush as a presence, as real as stone beneath his hand. He draws in the wick with a practiced turn. The flame leans once and settles low, a polite guest preparing to leave. Glass that blazed with golden heat now carries the faintest afterglow, a memory of brightness held in the curve of each lens. In the cooling air, the brass frame releases the day's first thin creak. He opens the logbook to the clean page saved for closing. The paper is cool and faintly fibrous under his fingers, the ink slow in the chill. He writes in measured strokes, wind veering southwest to west. Rain ceased, visibility increasing. Swell gentle. A final note for the hour, the date. A brief line for duties completed. A small, steady signature that has ended so many nights before. The room at the top of the tower feels different with the lamp dimmed. Shadows return to their corners, soft and harmless, and the glass reflects a ghost of the dawn. Give up a patient dripping that marks time in the absence of the clock. Far below, the surf unrolls itself with kindness, each wave an exhale that leaves a bright edge on the sanded rock. Gulls ride the slow lift of air near the cliff face, their calls softened by the damp. Elias rests his palms on the cool iron of the gallery rail. It leaves a faint scent on his hands, a whisper of salt and metal and yesterday's fog. His sleeves, wool warmed by hours of work, hold the ghost of black tea and the outline of steam that rose from the cup in the night. He lifts one hand and breathes it in. The familiarity, quick and comforting. The light across the water gathers and spills, like a mild tide of colour. Dawn is not a sudden thing here. It mends itself gradually, stitching grey to rose, rose to pearl. Clouds thin and share their threads with the sea, which wears them as a shawl. He watches the line where sky meets water and thinks, as he often does, that the world has a patient hand. The tower behind him holds its breath. With the lamp nearly out, the glass no longer blazes. It merely holds the day's first suggestion, a soft bloom that lives within the crystal. He knows each panel by its tiny flaw, each screw by its sympathy to the wrench. In this hour, even the familiar seems newly made, as if rinsed to the grain. A small breeze lifts, not enough to chill, just enough to move the hair at his temples. It passes through the gallery and down the stairwell, gathering a faint music from the iron steps, a sound like a distant shell. He feels that motion run through the tower and out again, a subtle clearing. Some mornings he imagines the building itself exhaling. The cliff path is a ribbon of darkened stone, traced with puddles. He can see it from here, winding up from the keeper's cottage, skirting the gorse and the tufts of clean grass brushed flat by rain. At the far bend, where the path turns out of the wind, a figure will appear, small at first, then human, then known. This is always the rhythm. Light to dusk, dusk to night, night to dawn, and at dawn the exchange. He leaves the rail only to move once around the gallery, a slow, careful circle to check the gutters and the bolts. Dew beads the heads of the fastenings and smears under his thumb when he tests for looseness. Everything holds. He notes this without words, as one notes a friend's steady heartbeat beneath a hand. When he re-enters the lantern room, the change in temperature is modest but clear. Stone within has held the night's cool more faithfully than the air without, and his breath lifts faintly in the difference. He trims the wick to its resting length and shields the last glow with the curved cap. The small, patient flame bows and goes. He carries the quiet with him down the first turns of the stair. The iron treads, still damp in places, give their familiar round of creaks, not complaint, but greeting. Each step sends a soft echo upwards that folds back into the stone. A slow descent makes a kind of music, and he follows it. At the service room, he pauses by the window. Glass latticed with droplets makes the world into 1,000 small lanterns, each reflecting that pale pink fringe of the east. He feels the promise of warmth in the air, faint as a lifted curtain. The weather will be gentle. He writes this into his bones and moves on. He sets the logbook by the telegraph shelf, though there is nothing urgent to send. The pen rests neatly across the top, aligned with the page's ruled margin. Order offers its own comfort at the end of a shift. He straightens a cloth, folds a rag, returns the oil can to its place with the lid tightened down. Outside again, the tower's base smells of wet rope and crushed grass. A small rivulet has formed where rain gathered on the paving and now seeks the cliff edge, a bright thread running over stone. He watches it choose its way, pleased by the patience of water. A spider's web, jewelled and complete, bridges the gate's hinge and trembles like a held breath. From the headland comes the first tentative call of a seabird claiming its morning. It is not the raucous, there is no rush to meet. Dawn teaches them every day that time can be gentle. They will exchange a few words when he reaches the door. The notes about the wind, the last readings, the small quirks of the night. For now, the space between them is its own kind of quiet. Elias inhales and feels the cool air expand in his chest. The taste of salt lingers on the back of his tongue, the companion of every morning here. Under it, a sweetness that belongs to rain-washed earth rises from the slope. Green, clean, and faintly warm. His sleeves still carry the polite ghost of tea, and he is fond of this layering of scents, human and sea and stone. He watches the horizon change from rose to pale gold at the edges. Light finds the wet grasses first, limbing each blade so that the whole headland seems to sparkle with a soft electricity. On the water, a narrow track brightens, laid from nowhere to here, as if the sea were remembering a road. Clouds gather themselves into gentle domes, paler than milk. Inside the tower, the last warmth of the lamp slips into the stone and leaves only the suggestion of it, like a glow through the memory. He thinks of the beam he set running hours ago, the way it combed the rain in slow arcs and stitched the night together. Now the world holds its own light, and the lamp may rest. It feels right to him, the way a door feels right when it closes with a true latch. The daykeeper draws closer, boots sounding a soft hollow on the wet steps. Between them lies the ordinary mercy of routine. Elias pictures the words he will say. Simple, sufficient, enough to pass the watch from one set of hands to another. Speech will come, but not before the last small stillness of the hour has finished its work. his fingers slightly chilled from the rail, warm as the breeze thickens by a degree. Somewhere beyond the cliff, a fish breaks the surface and leaves a ring that carries the sky outward. Seaweed along the lower rocks gleams like polished leather, a dark green satin laid flat. The whole cove smells faintly of kelp and clean stone. He glances up the tower once more. From here, the glass is a crown of pale facets set against the lifting sky. He knows its weight, its balance, its catalogue of tiny repairs. It returns his look calmly, a friend whose language is light. The daykeeper arrives with a small nod and a gentle smile, the kind exchanged at church doors and kitchen gates. He wipes one hand on his coat, not to remove wetness so much as to mark the moment, and takes the steps toward the service room. They will speak in low voices, because the morning deserves it. They will not say more than necessary, because the sea says enough. Elias turns once, slowly, to look at the water, the path, the cottage that will take him in. He notices how the puddles on the stones already thin at their edges, how steam lifts in the smallest threads from the darker patches of rock. The breeze threads the grass with a sound like brushing silt. He feels, in the simple standing, a kind of completion. When he steps inside, he will leave the door on its latch to air the rooms. He will hang his coat and smooth the cuffs, then put the kettle on for the daykeeper, who prefers his tea strong. He will wash his hands in cool water and look at the face that the night has left him. Content, lined lightly by care, brightened at the corners by the dawn. These are small things, and they matter. For a moment longer he stands and lets the light meet him where he is. The night has been tended, the beam kept, the notes written, the sea observed, as if it were a friend sleeping. Morning receives the tower back into itself, and the world, rinsed and ready, asks for nothing urgent. He answers with a quiet heart. He closes the log in his mind with the same measured care he used upon the page. Weather improving, swell modest, all is well. Then he turns to the door and the day, with the ease of a man who has finished his work, and leaves the gallery to its soft, drying light. Behind him,